integrating technology into your dispute resolution practice, making friends with a fourth party. That is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcast. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact dependent. Hi, everyone. This is Mac PLE, attorney, mediator, arbitrator, working throughout Florida and Texas. And welcome back to the LMI podcast. And I'm here with Daniel Rainey, mediator extraordinaire. And Dan, how are you doing today?
Doing very well. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, sir. Well, good to have you. And as we had discussed before you came on, you remember that you were episode number 1 on this show a few years back. And I specifically mean during the pandemic, right? In 2020, when this certain segment of the podcast was beginning to take a new life, with the instantmediations.com project and the LMI podcast project. You were the first interviewee. And so just wanted to reconnect with you as we approach episode number 300 to just go back full circle.
Well, you've done great work with the podcast. I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you again for inviting me.
Yes, thank you. Do you remember what we talked about the very first time?
I have no idea. It was too long ago.
I'm going to connect back to that video, in this one when people read the show notes. But basically, something I know about you is that not only are you a professor of conflict resolution, but you've taught this stuff for decades. And so I think a reason you were number 1 was because you had a lot of experience in technology when it came to online conflict resolution. This was all new to many people during that time. The pandemic, as you know, kind of shook the whole mediation world up. And all of us found ourselves on Zoom trying to mediate right away. And so many people turned to you because you had been thinking and doing online conflict resolution kind of work for many, many years before the Zoom boom, happened. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, I have been working with integrating technology into dispute resolution systems since the mid 1990s, really.
Yeah.
I went to the National Mediation Board in 1997, and they were looking for someone who knew something about mediation and who knew something about technology. And at that point, we were pretty thin on the ground. And so that was my formal beginning of saying, okay, not just thinking about this, but trying to actually integrate technology into mediation and arbitration.
Exactly. Well, that's why you were the one, because at that time it was scary for a lot of mediators and we didn't know how to get our practices off the ground. And then, we had come up with a book, How to Mediate Online. And so you were a big person to go to and to get feedback, after we get that published. But speaking of books, currently you are the author of a book that has recently come out. And I will share my screen. It is called Integrating Technology into Your Dispute Resolution Practice, Making Friends with the Fourth Party by Daniel Rainey. And so can you tell us, first off, why did you write this book? And when did you write it and get it published exactly?
It was published a couple of years ago. So I'm in the process of doing a second edition now to add some information about artificial intelligence. In fact, I would say we also have another book coming out that's called Governing Artificial Intelligence, which talks about integrating AI back into dispute resolution systems as well. But the reason I wrote this is, as you said, I've been working with the notion of integrating technology into mediation, arbitration, et cetera, for quite some time. And for the longest time, those of us who were working in that field were working sort of alone. The general consensus among mediators and arbitrators was that this online stuff will never work. Well, when COVID hit, everybody suddenly had no choice. They had to use it.
Yep.
And it went from this will never work to, oh, well, this actually works pretty well in some cases. And my goal in writing the book was to say, okay, now you're using it. Everybody's using technology of one kind or another. The question is, how do you use it well? How do you use it in a way that adds value to your process and that helps your clients? And basically, not just how do you use it, but how do you do it right? And so that was really the emphasis, or the impetus rather, for me writing the book in the first place.
Yeah. And what's the other book that you referenced a second ago that you're also working on?
Yeah, it's called Governing Artificial Intelligence, and really it looks at what it would take to re. First of all, you can't control AI. You can't control new technology. It's out there, and people are going to use it the way they use it, including people who have bad influences. But if you really wanted to use it in a way that was ethical and that added value to your process, what would you do? How would you govern that space? And so that's what we're trying to talk about in the book that's coming out. Hopefully in June it'll be out.
Got it. Great. So, when we first started talking back in 2020 about online mediations, it was at the beginning of the pandemic. Now, what do you think are the pandemic's lasting changes to the field of mediations? Kind of a broad question, but
Yeah.
now that we get to look back in time, what do you think the pandemic taught us?
Well, I think what the pandemic taught us was that we needed to get out of the mindset that we had, that the only way to do our work was to sit down at a table face to face with people. If you look at the training that mediators and arbitrators go through, the assumption in almost 100% of the training that we go through is that you're going to be in the room with the mediators or with the parties. You're going to be talking to them directly in an environment that you control in a certain way, but it's a conversational control. It's not another kind of control. And one of the things that COVID taught us was that there are other ways to do business. And the other ways to do business, in fact, in many cases are better than the way that we were doing business before. And I'll give you one concrete example. When I was with the board, we started integrating technology into our arbitration process. And it was slow going. And not because the parties didn't want to use technology, it was because the arbitrators didn't want to use technology.
Mhm.
But when COVID hit, all of a sudden things changed. And now, after COVID, when they could be doing it any way they want to do it, they could be going back to the way they were doing it before. Almost 100% of the arbitration in those fields is done online. There are reasons to do it face to face in some cases, but the vast majority of the work that they do is still done online. And that would not have happened the way it happened had it not been for the forced approach that we were having to take as a result of the pandemic.
I mean, couldn't say it better than myself. It's like we were all forced to accept the new reality because we had no choice anymore,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, you
And
either do that or you don't work.
yeah, exactly. And in many ways, I think AI is coming onto the scene almost, with the same kind of vigor. And you hear this phrase a lot that AI is not going to replace us, but but mediators who use AI are going to replace those who don't,
Well,
right?
yeah,
And
I just did a presentation to the Expo Tech that was run out of Argentina, out of Buenos Aires,
yes.
Latino America. The title they asked me to talk about. They gave me the title, and the title was "Can Artificial Intelligence Replace Mediators?"
Mhm.
And I started that presentation by saying that's the wrong question. Artificial intelligence has already replaced some mediators. If you look at what happens in the world of e-commerce,
Mm.
basically in a bounded universe like e-commerce, over 90% of the dispute resolution that occurs in e-commerce is done using algorithms, using fairly simple artificial intelligence. The question is, how is it going to impact the more messy world of mediation and arbitration that most of us work in?
Mhm.
If you're in a bounded universe like e-commerce, there are only so many things that can go wrong and only so many things you can do about it. And that's a perfect world for a decision tree and AI. But if you
Mhm.
have a divorce mediation practice, or you have a community mediation practice, or any of the other so-called messy situations that we get into where there are lots of ways to resolve it and lots of reasons why you're there, then AI is going to be more challenging to integrate. But it's going to integrate. It's already integrating. There are already platforms available to mediators and arbitrators that will help them with everything from their administrative tasks all the way up to suggesting possible resolutions. The question, again, I think it's the same question that we faced at the beginning of the pandemic. We know we can use it. We know that we can do that. How do we do it well? How do we do it to add value? How do we do it so that it doesn't harm our clients? And those are the big questions that, as with any technology, the first question that gets asked is not, should I do this? The first question that gets asked is, can I do it? And if the answer is yes, we go ahead and do it. And only after the fact, in some cases, do we say, okay, should we be doing it this way? And how should we be doing it to be ethical and to add value?
Yep. So, well, you brought up Expo Tech, and are you aware of whether or not you and I were the only Americans there or English speakers there?
I think we might have been. Yeah, might have been. And
Yeah.
I was pleased because I got a lot of comments in Spanish, which I was able to, with my bad Spanish and a translator, able to deal with.
Yeah.
Um, but it's the amount of interest in dispute resolution generally, and also the technology of dispute resolution is huge in Latin America.
Absolutely.
In fact, there's a newly released AI program in Spanish for Latin American mediators and arbitrators that just hit the market within the last week.
Yes. And so one thing I wanted to do was also take this recording as well and dub it into Spanish because now I've been using this new tool 11 Labs, lately a lot, trying to get everything over into Spanish just because there's no reasons anymore, not to share the love.
And
Um,
that, by the way, is one of the huge advantages to artificial intelligence. It is one way that you can suddenly work in multiple languages in a way that is workable and where you can rely a little bit on the translations. It's always questionable, even with a human translator. It's always questionable whether you get exactly what you're trying to say. But
yep.
the ability to translate using AI is much better than it used to be, and that's going to be a huge help for mediators who work internationally.
Absolutely, cross-border disputes and all of that. So there are so many benefits to getting really good in AI. All right. So in your book, you introduce this concept of the fourth party in ODR. Can you explain what it is and why it's crucial for mediators to understand the
Sure.
fourth party?
I'll just back up and say that when people started using technology to a great degree during COVID and have continued, the assumption tended to be, oh, I'm doing the same thing I was doing before. I'm just doing it now using this technology, and it hasn't really changed what I do. And that's not right. That's not correct. The fourth party, and I didn't introduce the term. The term was introduced by Ethan Katch and Janet Rifkin back in 2000, 2001, in the very first book that was written about online dispute resolution. And there is a conception of the fourth party that is that the technology takes over everything and does it. You do it all from beginning to end using the technology. And I operate with a slightly different definition, but one that I think is consistent with Ethan and Janet's definition. And that is anytime you add technology to the process of mediation or arbitration, or any dispute resolution practice for that matter, but I talk mostly about mediation and arbitration. Anytime you add technology to those processes, you are fundamentally changing the process. And I'll give you just a very simple, very straightforward example. When you were working face to face with oral communication and written communication and documents that you were doing with paper, you could say to the parties, I will maintain confidentiality. I will not break confidentiality. When we are done, I will destroy all of my records except your agreement to mediate and your agreement, if you make one. And I will not have anything that will compromise your data or your information. And I will, unless they drag me into court and make me talk about what we did, I will maintain confidentiality.
Mhm.
The minute you start using a desktop computer, not even connected to the internet, the minute you start using a desktop computer, you can no longer say exactly that because the only way you eliminate the information that you're dealing with from the drive on your computer is to take the drive out and destroy it physically. If you don't do that, a forensics person can go in and recover that information. So that's a very minor thing, but it's not so minor because when we start using cloud technology, when you say I'm using a cloud computer, what you're really saying is I'm using somebody else's computer. It doesn't belong to me. I don't control it. And so I have to talk to the parties about what is the risk involved in using the technology with the information you're going to give me. And what I've developed over the years is what I call a risk damage assessment process. When I sit down with the parties to begin working, I say, okay, what is it we're going to be talking about? What is the data that we're going to be passing back and forth and sharing? And how damaging would it be if that information were seen by someone outside this mediation who shouldn't see it? If the damage is really great, that's one thing. If you don't mind seeing it on the front page of the Post tomorrow, that's okay too. But I know what the damage level is. Now let's look at the risk that's involved in using the technology that we have in front of us to take that data back and forth between us. If just again as an example, email. I am sure that you and most of the people who see this podcast will have received an email they shouldn't have gotten, and you probably sent one accidentally that you probably shouldn't have sent.
Yep.
It's easy to accidentally make that mistake. So that, in my opinion, is a very high risk technology. So if you tell me as a party, oh, if this gets out, it's really, really bad, it's really damaging, I'm going to tell you we're not going to use certain technology. We're certainly not going to use email, and we may not use any email, may not use any technology at all. I've had cases where we've said this stuff is so sensitive that we're going to do it on paper. We're going to send a courier across town so that you can see it without having to put it on media. So
Mhm.
it's, this whole notion of the fourth party is the technology becomes an active element in what you do, even if that active element only changes what you can say about confidentiality and security. But what I try to talk about in the book is, how do you prepare the parties? If I invite you, Mac, into a conference room as a party, you know what that means. You know what a conference room is. You probably wear a nice suit. You're coming to do the process. You walk in. There's this big table. There's probably books on the bookshelves around us. I mean, we're talking to each other face to face. Everybody is sort of reasonably comfortable. And if they're not comfortable in the situation, they're at least comfortable knowing what the situation is. I don't have to teach you how to talk in a conference room.
Yep.
If I invite you into a virtual room using Zoom and any other of the technologies that we use, I may very well have to literally teach you how to talk in that space in order to be effective. And so, what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to talk about here, is how do you bring people into that virtual space in a way that doesn't disadvantage them and doesn't advantage someone else? And the whole idea is preparation. Again, I'll shut up in a second, but I'll give you one last example. When I work with parties online, I insist that before we meet to talk about their issue, that we meet simply to look at the technology itself. So I'll take them into the virtual room that I'm going to create, and every process, everything we're going to have to do in the mediation or arbitration, we will do ahead of time without ever talking about their issue. And we'll just have a conversation. If we're going to use a breakout room, we'll go to the breakout room. If we're going to share documents, we'll share documents. We'll do everything we're going to do before we ever start talking about their issue, so that when we do start talking about their issue, the technology doesn't get in the way. It's simply a way for us to talk to each other, as opposed to being this thing that we have to overcome. So I know I'm sort of rambling on a bit here, but I'm passionate about this.
Yep.
You can do this stuff right, and you can really do it so that your parties are very comfortable, or you can not prepare very well, and you can possibly disadvantage some of the people that you're working with.
Yeah, and this spills over also to the law when it comes to the courtroom, electronic courtroom. Okay, during COVID, all the courts went online, and I remember, in one trial I had, it was a full blown 4-day trial in Fort Bend County, all online, 100%, and we had no choice. Now, I was pretty good on Zoom. I understood, how to, screen share and show my exhibits and all of that. My opposition was not as tech savvy. And I remember a couple of times, in fact, they would ask for my assistance, and it was kind of awkward because I got my client on the screen. I can't really help the other side. Now, courtesy wise, sure, I might want to help out my opposition, but I can't ethically help him put on his case because it goes against my client's interests. And so I remember thinking about this and whether or not technology can, in fact, disadvantage somebody if they're not prepared. So what you said about that example, in mediation, you want to spend time with people to get to know the technology first before you get into it, because you don't want there to be some kind of advantage given by one party who might be really savvy, and slick with the tech, and the other one doesn't even know how to communicate within that mold. I think that is something that we're going to see more and more and more in different, aspects, of life. when it comes to the law. So yeah, I read into it,
Well,
and I can see why it's so effective the same way in mediation.
yeah, it's going to be effective, and the addition of artificial intelligence is going to amplify this to some degree.
Yeah.
I mean, because I mean, one of the big questions about AI is how much do I show it to the parties? How much access do I allow them to have to the AI programs that I'm using? And what AI programs are they using outside my site that I don't
Yeah.
know they're using? I mean, that's another thing is that when you begin to use technology for the work that you do, you have to think about losing your traditional notion of what your control of the situation is. If I'm back in that conference room with you and you're sitting across the table, it's easier for me to control the flow of information, to control the conversation, to understand who knows what and who hears what. All of
Yep.
that stuff is happening there in a proximate space. Again, I'll give you a little example of what I've done in the past that convinced me that I had no control. That's an illusion. I was doing a mediation, labor mediation that was going to last for probably about several months or a year. And I wanted to use some document sharing material. I wanted to use some brainstorming material. And I wanted to use some rating and ranking material so that we would meet face to face. Then there would be a couple of weeks when we worked together and they could work online during those couple of weeks. And so I wanted them to touch all of that stuff before we started working. And so I said, okay, what we're going to do is that we're going to use the brainstorming technology to put in your ideas about the greatest rock and roll songs ever. And so it take a week to do that. And once we got all those in there, we had a couple of hundred songs in there. I said, what I want you to do now is you want to use this polling technology that we're going to use, and I want you to indicate what you think the top 10 are. And so everybody did that. So when I got them together the first time face to face, that was the first thing we talked about, that we had successfully together conquered the technology. They had all been able to use it. So it was a win to start the day.
Mhm.
And we were talking about, okay, this is thing. And one of the people who was in the room raised her hand and said, I don't know anything about rock and roll music. And I said, well, you didn't have to. I mean, you could have voted for anybody you wanted to. And she said, I don't know anything about rock and roll, but my husband does. And he was in a meeting with his staff. And so they put me on speaker and they all told me how I should vote. and and I'm thinking, okay, this is a perfect example of the fact that I have no idea what you're doing when you're out of my sight on technology.
Yeah.
That my notion of control is we can agree on the front end about how we're going to operate, but I don't control you. You're going to
Yeah.
do what you're going to do, and I have to understand that as a third party as I begin to use the technology.
Yes. 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 Definitely. And a lot of your assumptions were undercut as well, right? Because you assumed that there's no way this person would be getting feedback like this.
Right.
So, okay, one last question. So, you discuss building trust in your book, specifically see chapter 5. If
Right.
mediators could focus and learn just 3 best practices for building trust and rapport in the online environment, what would you tell them to focus on?
The first thing I would say is never use any technology with your parties that you are not completely familiar with yourself, that you have not totally worked out the bugs for yourself. What I tell the mediators that in the classes when I teach, what I tell them is, impose upon your family and your friends. Bring them in. If you're going to use Zoom, put them on Zoom. If you're going to use a polling process, you have them do a poll so that you personally understand exactly how that works. Because every minute that you have to think about the technology when you're with your parties is a minute you're not thinking about your party's problem. And so, what you want is to become so facile with the technology that you
Mhm.
don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about it.
Yep.
That will build trust because people will see that you know what you're doing.
Yep.
Second thing I would say in terms of building trust is go out of your way to make sure they feel comfortable doing whatever it is you're doing, right? So ask them, are you comfortable using this technology? And if they say yes, take the next step and say, okay, then let's use it together so that we're sure that everybody's on the same page. And again, we're talking about trusting the process. One of the things that mediators get when you go into a room before you blow it is that people look at you and say, we assume you know what you're doing.
Yep.
And we assume that you're going to run this process in a way that's fair, and you're going to run this process in a way that allows me to have my say. And so when you're using the technology, part of that trust building is I look competent because I know what I'm doing with the technology. I have brought you in and let you become comfortable so that you trust the situation, you trust the virtual room that I've created for you. And then as you go forward, I think the other thing that builds trust is if you actually check in and listen with to the parties about how they're feeling about using all that technology as you move forward. I tend to, at the end of a day's worth of mediation, and in my practice that I had, basically we were doing all day sessions over a long period of time. They were very complicated sessions. At the end of every day, I would say, okay, how'd we do? Is it working?
Yeah.
Is it not working? What could I do to make it better? What can I do to make you more comfortable? The whole idea of trust, really, their trust in you and in the process is going to really hinge on whether you look like you know what you're doing and whether
Yeah.
you make them comfortable with what you're doing and make them comfortable and feel that they're being treated fairly and that they have a say. If you can do that, you're home free as a mediator. If you can't do that and you let the technology get in the way of that, then you have real problems.
Okay. So make sure you know the technology, help them know the technology, and check in.
Right.
Do I get that right?
Yeah, exactly. And if you find in the process of checking in that they have trouble doing a certain thing, then find a way to use the technology without them having to do that. Just adapt to the people that you're working with, essentially.
Gotcha. I think one thing I would add to that is trying to use technology or integrate technology that is already quite common as far as common knowledge goes. Zoom now is no longer a problem for most people. Most people that I've worked with, who I've worked with, now know how to get on, and still surprised sometimes people have no idea. But most people now know how to get the app, or at least making sure that the battery is going to be charged fully before they start. Things like that. That might ruin the experience. But
And it goes a little further than that too, though,
yeah,
because I notice, people who use Zoom all the time. They'll be on camera and they'll have a light behind them so their face is dark, or they'll have
the
the
silhouette. Yeah,
they'll have everything tilted so you see them from the nose up.
exactly.
Every one of those things that you can do to say, look, I want to make you look and sound and act as best you can,
Yeah.
and I'm going to help you do that. And again, we're talking about trust building.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So I was also, that was a Zoom example, but I was thinking about Google. I use a lot of Google Docs whenever I'm doing documents with people, and these companies, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Zoom, they've done a lot of the legwork for us. They've kind of been training the public, over the last number of years, just to get really good at their tools. And so I'm all about integrating those same tools and bringing them into my online mediation experience.
My only caveat about that would
Sure.
be that I try not to, even though it may be very common technology, I try not to assume that
Mhm.
they're at the level where they need to be. And I will literally say to parties as we start, some of the things I say may insult you because you already know all this stuff, but I just want to be sure that we all
Yeah.
start on the same page. And every now and then I get really surprised because somebody doesn't know something that I think everybody knows. And so I can head that off before it becomes a problem. But you're absolutely right. We're in a different world now than when COVID first started. People were in the middle of the wilderness, and
Yeah.
now there's so much technology out there that people use that you're operating with people who are fairly savvy in most cases.
Yeah.
But what I try to do is say, look, I'm going to make sure that you're not disadvantaged by being in this space. That's my goal, is to make sure that I'm not disadvantaging you by inviting you in.
Absolutely. All right. Dan Rainey, thank you so much for the conversation today.
Sure.
And just want to bring back again your book, Integrating Technology into Your Dispute Resolution Practice, Making Friends with the Fourth Party by Daniel Rainey. And Dan, where can people get the book if they wanted to?
It's on Amazon, of course, and it's 11 international publishers. So if you just go to 11, you'll find it there as well. And it's available digitally. It's available hard copy. It's available yada yada yada. So you can get it about anyway. It's easy to
Awesome.
find.
Yes, awesome. So lots of good points in there, and so I hope it's a must read for anyone who's going to be taking online mediation, conflict resolution very seriously as part of their work life. Okay, all right. Thanks
Thanks
so
a lot.
much.
Good
All
to
right,
talk to you. Take
take
care.
care, everyone. Check out lmipodcast.com for more. Take
Bye
care. Bye
bye.
bye.